Our study continues in Revelation. We're going to be looking especially at Revelation chapter 11, beginning in verse 13 through verse 19. Pretty well takes it in. But before we begin, I want to call attention to a specific thought that I've presented time and time again concerning the book of Revelation that I think is important, and it is important in this text because of the lack of information that people may perceive is in the section. What I want to see and say is this: we need to fully grasp the point that whenever you have a battle in the book of Revelation, evil against good, you have the gathering, you never have the conflict, and then you have the victory. Now, certainly, when you look at Revelation chapter 6 and 7, you've got a battle. When you look at Revelation chapter 8 and 9, battles are taking place. My point is that whenever God puts it succinctly or quickly or summarizes what's happening, you always see the gathering. You never see the battle, and you see the outcome. And the outcome is always the victory of God's people and God. I want you to see that point in verse 14, 15, 18 as I introduce this section. And then we're going to go through some verses from chapter 16, 19, and 20 chapters. And it's an important point, so I want to take the time to point it out. In Revelation 11:14, the point is, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe cometh quickly. So what he's been discussing is woe 1, woe 2, and we have looked at the destruction of Jerusalem. We have looked at the two witnesses. More can be said, especially about the times, and half times. Looking at verse 15, the seventh angel sounded, and there followed great voices in heaven. As you know, the third woe goes with the seventh angel. That's what he's pointing out. And here's the point: the kingdom of the world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. We're getting down to it. Revelation 11:18, and the nations were wroth. That means the nations continued. And thy wrath, God's wrath, came. And the time came for the dead to be judged, and the time to give their reward to thy servants, the prophets, to the saints, and to them that fear thy name, the small, the great, to destroy them that destroy the earth. Now check with me the vital concept that I was introducing to you. You just read it in this text. We're going to go over it again. But now see this vital concept repeated. We start with Revelation 16, verse 12. These verses also will give us a preview of what we're about to study when we finish the first section in Revelation chapter 11, the last verse, verse 19. So what you have beginning in verse 12 is Armageddon gathering. The sixth angel poured out his bowl upon the great river, the river Euphrates. You remember that. And the water thereof was dried up, and the way might be made for the kings that come from the sun rising. Here they come. He then describes who they are. Verse 13, 14, and 15. Now take notice of verse 16. So you've heard their coming, you've heard them described. Verse 16, they gathered them together into the place which is called Hebrew Armageddon. Verse 17, and they were defeated. The seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the earth. There came forth a great voice out of the temple from the throne saying, it is done. Verse 16, they gathered. Verse 12 through verse 15 tells you who gathered, the enemy of God. And then in verse 17, the voice just simply says, done, over with. See what I mean by the gathering, the victory, no battle? Turn with me to chapter 19. Here you have the beast and the lamb as they war, just as you do in chapter 16, just uses different language. Chapter 16 is the announcement. Chapter 19 is the event. In chapter 19, verse 19, and I saw the beast. That would be the beast that we're going to read about and have read about. The one that I've been saying is Rome. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat upon the horse and against his army. Verse 20, the beast was taken. You see the concept. They gathered together. Next verse, the beast was taken. And with him the false prophet, Revelation 13, that wrought the signs in his sight, wherewith he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. They too were cast alive into the lake of fire that burneth with brimstone. We then go to the third time that a battle is mentioned, and the gathering, and then the end. This battle is a different one. It deals with us. You very rarely heard me say that, because in my judgment, the book of Revelation is discussing what is going to be occurring in their day and time, as John writes in the mid-60s in the first century. And what you have in the mid-60s, probably 64, 65, 66, somewhere in there, as he writes, he's pointing out to the people, here's what's going to happen. Here's a warning to the children of Israel. And Jerusalem is going to fall, Revelation chapter 11. You need to be on the right side. The gospel will be preached. And then he's going to announce the judgment against God's enemies. He introduces them in chapter 12 and 13. He then announces they are going to be defeated. And then in chapter 17, 18, and 19, he talks about that defeat. Well, in chapter 20, you see the defeat of Satan in the first century until you get to verse 8. Verse 8 has to do with all of time. 5 verses, 3 verses. The rest of it deals with principles that were presented where God had the victory. And now for all time, we understand we have the victory. I realize that most people do not look at Revelation in that way. But what I just said is not against what the Bible teaches overall. Because I still believe that there's going to be a judgment day. I still believe there's going to be a resurrection of all men. There's still going to be an eternal heavenly abode. Now take notice in chapter 20, verse 8. He had discussed the 1,000 years, so he says, when the 1,000 years are finished, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. And that loosening is going to be for a short time, for a small time. Here's the first thing you think about when you think about Satan winning. It's always, God always uses language that is of a short duration when Satan is winning. When God's people are winning, it's 1,000 years. It's an enormous length of time. It's a complete length of time. Remember, the 1,000 years is not literal. So Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, verse 8, that was verse 7, verse 8, and shall come forth to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth. Gog and Magog, that's the entirety of the earth. That's the concept, lest you misunderstand. When you read in the Old Testament Gog and Magog, he doesn't have in mind the entirety of the world. When you read here, Gog and Magog, it stands for all the rest of the world. To gather them together to the war, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. The number of those who will fight against Christianity is innumerable. It is large, great. And here they're gathering together against God's people. One gathering, that's the way it's depicted in the figurative language. Verse 9. And they went out over the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints round about, the church through the centuries, and the beloved city, the church through the centuries, and fire came down out of heaven and devoured them. Battle's over. Battle's over. The gathering, battle's over. And he just talked about the eternity of time. He just talked about Enron's judgment. He just talked about from the end of Jerusalem to the end of the nation of Israel until the end of time. That's what he just told you about. Kind of sounds like the seven thunders, doesn't it? God's not telling you what's going to happen in your time. What he did tell us was what happened in the first century when the enemies of God were fighting energetically, passionately against God's people. They won. They were victorious. Was it a literal physical battle where more of the enemy died than the children of God? No. It was a spiritual battle for the minds of men. We've covered that. I call your attention to 2 Corinthians 10. Our battle is the imaginations and the minds and the attitudes of men. That's what Paul said. Our weapons are not weapons of the flesh. That's what Paul said. And that's what John is helping us to understand as well. We may lose our life and win the battle because we receive a upgrade, if you please. So here you have these three examples of what is going on. Understand how I say this. The principle, the concept is found in chapter 11. Oh, you mean chapter 11 is talking about the end of the world as well? No, I'm not. This is, in my judgment, just about the only verse that will talk about the totality of earth until the end of time. And when I say the only verse, of course, it talks about the judgment day within the context as well. Do I need to clarify anything there? Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask to say, Ron, is this what you mean? Or whatever. I'll be glad to listen, because sometimes what I say does not come across as if I said it. No comments. Okay. We looked at a vital principle. The enemies of God are depicted a variety of times as gathering against the people of God. You never see the battle, you always see the victory. So now we're in chapter 11. After you see the trodden underfoot of the holy city, after we read about the two witnesses who died in the street, the bodies were left in the street, and then they were raised from the dead, a resurrection, that was not a literal bodily resurrection, but a resurrection of the cause of Christ. In chapter 11, verse 13, in that hour there was a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. And there were killed in the earthquake 7,000 persons, and the rest were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. So here was a decisive act of judgment, and it's reported to have already occurred in the first century in his vision, in his concepts. And it established divine intervention rather than a mere warning. Warning, yes. Only a warning? No. Verse 14. And the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe cometh quickly. So here we have the final woe is announced as imminent without narration, emphasizing certainty rather than process. He's not giving us this process again. He's letting us know there's a certain event occurring, going to occur. Verse 15. The seventh angel sounded, and there followed great voices in the heaven, and they said, listen closely to what the voices are saying. The kingdom of the world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, his Christ. And he shall reign forever and ever. By the way, he shall reign forever and ever also has to do with eternity of time. Say it again. Reign forever and ever has to do with the first century, the second, down through time. Doesn't stop. So when I pointed out what I did in Revelation chapter 20, I don't mean there's not any phrase or word or statement other than chapter 20 that deals with all of time. This one does, because what it's doing, it's applying the point that is being made throughout what we've studied. There was a great event. That great event would be a announcement, a situation that would bring about the kingdom of heaven is established totally and completely. God has finished his work. The preaching of the gospel has finished. And the fall of Jerusalem is right around the corner. And he talks about it in this chapter, in this section. Revelation 11, 16, 17. By the way, I understand figures of speech are not easy to grasp and to follow, especially when you hear them for the first time. Some of y'all didn't hear them for the first time. You just heard them in this description for the first time. I get to study them over and over and over again. I get to hear other people time and time again talk about these things. I get to decide for me what I think is in the text by the figures of speech. But figures of speech are figures of speech that you have to understand, what does God mean by them? It doesn't matter what I think God means by them. What matters is, what does God mean? And I'm telling you what my study has concluded. I'm either right or I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm still telling you about things that happened in the first century that are true. But I may not understand the figures of speech. And more than happy to listen to anybody who would give me some help on those things. Right, David? We're taking notice. He helped me this past week with some things that we'll bring up. No big deal. Chapter 11, verse 16, and the 24 elders, we remember them, who sit before God on his throne, fell upon their faces and worshiped God. Something happened that brought this about. We give thee thanks, O Lord God, the Almighty, who art and wast, because thou hast taken thy great power and didst reign. You talk about wisdom and prudence and counsel and knowledge and intelligence and power to do what God has done through the 4,000 centuries before the Messiah came and Christianity was preached and the church was established, his kingdom was established, and the fall of Jerusalem, all of those things. That's a magnificent event. And I put it as one event when it is event after event after event. God brought that about. Romans chapter 11. Romans chapter 11 is Paul's concluding remark concerning his ways are past tracing out, because he just pointed out some basic things, chapter 9 and 10 and 11 in Romans, that would indicate how magnificent and intelligent God is. I have written a few things about God's election. If you want to read them on the Facebook site, I'm active again. What you have in chapter 9, 10, and 11 is the election of the nation, the adoption of the nation. You also have the election of grace, the salvation of individuals, which is always conditional. The national election or adoption is unconditional. They were God's people, and that's that. Then you had a third, and the third group were those who were elected for task, things to do that God had to have done in order to bring about this magnificent plan that he's made, that you're seeing now in Revelation in figurative language. What I mean by all of that is this, without repeating the whole thing. You have figures of speech in Revelation, but before that you had the Old Testament, and you had Paul's explanation in some detail as to what God has done. So you have the enthronement, and you have the worship of the one who was on the throne. And it would confirm in this text that the reign had already resumed. It is not anticipated, it's now going on. Remember, from the standpoint of the first century, and John writing around the mid 60s. Turning to Revelation 11:18. And the nations were wroth. That means the nations continued. That means there were people who were sinful who were still on the earth. Well, the nations were full of anger, and God's wrath, came. And the time came for the dead to be judged, spiritually dead, and the time to give the reward to thy servants, to the prophets, and to the saints, to them that fear thy name, the small, the great, to destroy them that destroy the earth. He came to destroy the land, not the totality of the world. Some would disagree with that, but that's what he's talking about within the context of the figures of speech and the statements being made. Hostility still persists, but the arrival of the judgment time is declared, marking the enemy as already defeated. You see what I mean by gathering, overcome, and defeated? That's what you just heard. They are full of wrath. Where's the battle? You didn't hear it. What you heard was God gave the people, his people, the victory. Chapter 19 does deal with future things. Not all of it. And there was open in the temple of God that is in heaven. The temple on the earth is destroyed. It's gone. Has been destroyed for 2,000 years. will never, ever be rebuilt. There are dozens of things and signs that God gave that it will never, ever be rebuilt. An emperor tried to rebuild it and got hurt for it, early centuries. There was opened the temple of God that is in heaven, and they were seen in his temple the ark of his covenant. And there followed lightnings and voices and thunders, an earthquake and great hail. We hear that phrase a number of times, and we're going to probably deal with quite a bit of it. Therefore, the section concludes, and it is signaling resolution rather than ongoing conflict with what it has been talking about. Is there going to be ongoing conflict? Chapter 20, yes. But what he just did was, here is what is happening. I'm giving it to you in figures. And now when he gets here, he says, what God had planned, the things that were fulfilled concerning Jerusalem and the fall of the nation of Israel, no longer the chosen people, no longer the privileged people, but now those people, the seed of Abraham, the seed of Isaac, would be the children of God, would be the church, would be Christians. And they are the only ones that are the chosen of God. And when it comes to salvation, the seed of Abraham, the seed of Isaac, have been the chosen ones all the way through time. Broad statement, full of figures. So here's what we've just found out concerning what we've been studying. I gave this to you when we were looking at the trumpets sounding. Amos 3:8. The lion hath roared. Who shall not fear? What he just said was all will fear. The Lord Jehovah hath spoken. He applied his figure of speech, which we appreciate. Who can but prophesy? You must teach it. Amos 4:12. O Israel, because Amos is talking to the children of Israel in 800 BC, maybe 700 BC. It kind of depends on which one you're aiming at. O Israel, and because I will do this unto thee, prepare to meet thy God, O Israel. Now, if Jerry Brewer were here among us, what he would point out is Brother Foy Wallace made the point. That's not talking about the judgment day. Prepare to meet thy God. Yes, we need to prepare. Matthew 24:25. But that is saying to the children of Israel, during the nation of Israel, 700 years before Christ came, you are in sin. You are steeped in sin, and so are others around you, other nations, which you went through in chapter 1 and chapter 2, dwelling on the fact of Samaria and dwelling on the fact of Judah. And he says, the lion is roared. Prepare. God is coming upon you as a nation. In that day and time, they repented. Not the north, but the south did. And they were saved. They were delivered. We are through with chapter 11. I've already given you a few things concerning chapter 12 and what's about to come. When you turn to chapter 12, we will discuss one or two things, not very much. But again, it will be as a preview of what is about to come. What you just saw in chapter 11 was the total rejection of the old account and the acknowledgement and the praising of the new dispensation with the church. give you an opportunity to say something. I need a repeater.
Can you hear Kim?
No,
Okay. Sure, absolutely.
sentence by sentence. Oh, yeah, that'll work great, Kim.
Hey, Ron, I have in my notes that history says that,
Give me a half a second. Give me half a second. Okay, go ahead. I was turning off a noise. I hope I can hear you.
can you hear me?
Basically, go ahead. Now I can hear you because the air conditioner went off.
Okay, so I have in my notes that, you know, that in chapter 11 where it says a tenth part of the city was destroyed. I have in my notes that, what?
You got a microphone. I still can't get out here. No, they can't hear you.
Okay, so in my notes for chapter 11, it says that a tenth part of the city was destroyed. I have in my notes that history says that part of Jerusalem was destroyed before the rest of it was. Do you remember
Yes.
that? That's true?
My understanding is yes. Matter of fact, Titus did not want the temple to be destroyed, and he put out the command, don't destroy the temple. Well, in order to destroy the temple, you've got to destroy half of the city. And there were a number of folks who were killed getting to the temple, but they had heard there was money in the temple. And so, therefore, the soldiers went in and set it on fire. And that consumed a lot of their wealth, you might say, or they lost a lot of their wealth, especially their great, great temple. So I would see that fully with what was said. As a matter of fact, I would have dealt with some of the details as to how many were killed. We have to understand that a tenth part doesn't necessarily mean 10%. It's just talking about a portion. And there are a couple of passages in the Old Testament where God has said through the prophets, whenever he would bring judgment upon the nation or a nation, not just the nation of Israel, that he would use a third or he would use a tenth. And it indicates it would be partial destruction. However, you will take notice that after that, or in the context of all of that, is you have total destruction of the city, and then you have the kingdom being recognized and announced as having come, the one that they were looking. Daniel 2, I think there's somebody studying that with you guys now. Daniel 2, Daniel, I guess it would be Daniel 7, Daniel 9. Those passages would deal with the coming kingdom in great, great, great detail. As a matter of fact, there's so much detail in the book of Daniel that writers after the first century, since they read Daniel and they saw the kingdoms and they saw Antiochus Epiphanes and they saw the details, they said Daniel was written after the fact. Couldn't be. It's been proven that that did not happen, but that shows you how much detail. So, yes, the city was not totally destroyed with, and that's being indicated by a tenth. Isn't that amazing what a preacher will say and how long he'll talk just to say yes? I talk with AI all the time. People consider me kind of foolish, but I'll ask him a question. He'll give me a long answer, and I'll say briefly, he'll give me a half of an answer, still too long, and I'll say yes or no. Yes, Kim. It indicates that only a partial part of the city was destroyed at one time, totally destroyed the nation, however. By the way, Joshua asked me a question concerning the history of Israel and how come we don't hear more about it. And I called his attention to something that Sue and I found out when we were just a little bit older than Joshua, and that is the Masada, the great plateau, the 300-foot plateau next to the Sea of the Dead Sea. And some 900 and some odd, 50, 60, 66 Israelites died in 73 AD by the Roman army. And we were able to see the ramp that was built in the first century. That was partially deteriorated, yes. And you could look around from the plateau, you could look to the ground, and you could see the various camps of the Roman army that was camped around that plateau. Well, the history is that those Israelites were recognizing that this was their last night. So they asked the priest, what is the easiest way to die? What is the least painful way? And the least painful way was to slit somebody's throat. And by the time the message gets to the brain, the blood's already drained out and it doesn't think any longer on that matter. So they chose the assassins, and those folks would kill everybody. 5 people got away. 5 people hid and did not die and told what occurred. Now, today, whenever they have new recruits in Israel, they take them up on Masada, and there's a great, great deal of ceremony and ritual that goes along with it. But they basically say, never again, never again. We will not allow an army to destroy us like they destroyed us in the first century. Let me very quickly, in the half second I've got, Revelation chapter 12, Jesus wants Satan identified. You have a dozen names of Satan. Well, maybe you've got 4, and they're used a dozen times. Go through and mark each verse that would talk about Satan and what he's called, the identity that John gives. I think it will be beneficial. Chapter 12 begins a new section of our study. It begins the last half of the book of Revelation. We've studied the first half, had certain concepts. Now, chapter 12 begins a recognition of those enemies, the enemies outside of Israel. Israel is no more, Revelation 11. Still going to talk about them, but Israel's no more. But he introduces to us what is behind all of it and who are the helpers, the one that's behind all of it, Satan, Revelation 12.